and welcome to my podcast on real relationships. My name is Sophie Passon, and I am a relationship expert, international speaker, and best-selling author of the book Your Other Half. I decided to start this podcast because, in my opinion, relationships are currently not being portrayed as what they really are. Whether you're watching the news or TV, social media, the perception given to people is wrong, and my aim is to talk about what happens in the real world, talk about real stories, and listen to what real people think, do, or go through, as opposed to creating expectations of something that doesn't actually exist. I may not agree with everything that is said by my guests, but it is their chance to express their opinions and their stories. And here today we have Caroline Rupik, and what we're going to talk about is difficult conversations, especially around money. Hi, Caroline.
Hi, Sophie. Thanks for having me along today.
No worries at all. So can you tell us a little bit about yourself first, please?
Yeah, so I'm a Wills and Probate Associate for a company called Straight Talk Estate Planning. I manage people's wills, their powers of attorney, and also their probate. So yes, difficult conversations, absolutely.
That's it. And that's pretty much what I wanted to do this episode, because difficult conversations, in terms of relationships happen for numerous things, like saying to someone that you're leaving, or that, there's something that you're not happy about with them, or something that they do. But death and money are two subjects that are difficult to broach. One being because obviously it scares us, and also because people don't like to talk about money, do they really?
No, they don't. And that can be for such a wide number of reasons. People don't want to appear money grabbing. People feel very shy and vulnerable when they're talking about their money. And also about their health and what they would want to do with both their finances and their health. And they get very anxious. They feel like they don't want to bother people with horrible things like that. But it's amazing when I do get my clients to really take that step and talk to their family members about their money and things like that. The relief they feel and the improvement in their lives, it's palpable. The smiles on the faces. It's never as difficult as they think it's going to be.
And is that why it's so important to have this sort of conversations?
I think it's massively important for a number of reasons. Firstly, it's really dangerous to make assumptions about either what your other family members are doing with their finances or for what they might want in the future. So, for example, here's a funny one. I had some clients who really, they've been together for 30 odd years, but they'd never been married, and they didn't think that that was a big problem for anyone in their family. Now, from my point of view, for tax planning, being married is a positive. So I said, well, why don't you consider it? And I persuaded them to have the conversation with their children, which they didn't want to do because they didn't want to burden their children with that decision. But they did. And their kids came out and said, well, actually, we'd really like you to be married. And they've gone on and had a wonderful, very small, very private ceremony, but it's been a really positive and lovely experience for them. And from my point of view, it's benefited them financially. So, a difficult conversation they didn't want to have. They felt like it, they were dragging their kids into a part of their lives that wasn't right for them. But it's brought about so much positive reactions and experiences. So,
So what sort of excuses do people use for not talking about it, do you find?
I think often it's things like, oh, I don't want to bother with someone with something like that, or, oh, it's so awkward. I feel really awkward talking about this, because we're not taught, especially as Brits, we're not taught to share these quite personal, in our mind, situations.
So it's interesting you say that, because I think that actually the Brits are more open to it than, for instance, the French. Because in France, you don't even say to people what you voted for half the time, let alone what your salary would be.
Yeah.
But here, it's something that would be shared, for instance.
Yeah. So, yes, salaries, weirdly, that kind of thing, they do get shared. But actually, so another difficult conversation that was had, and I was really pleased at the positive outcome, is a gentleman I was speaking to, writing his wills with him, and he actually had his sons in the room with him. And they had been brave enough to broach the subject of money. And one of the sons had turned around and said, Dad, I don't want another penny off you. You've helped me buy my home. You've helped me pay for my wedding. My brother's not had anything off you. So scratch me out your will, exclude me. I don't want it. Give it to my brother. And that, the dad wasn't expecting that. And because
it's very mature, because there's very few people to the degree that probably would say that.
Well, actually, it's amazing. I find so often parents have a huge expectation that they ought to leave something to their children. But when they take that step and have what they're worried is going to be that awkward, difficult conversation for the kids, what they might get from them, the kids say, no, we don't want it. Get out there, enjoy your lives. We've got a nice salary. We're doing okay. We want you to be comfortable now. The expectations between generations are very different. And again, it can be really a positive thing.
Yeah. And what tips would you have for people that are struggling to bridge the subject? What are some easy maybe ways to bring it up to the attention of the family members, or to ease it in, so to speak?
If there is something happening in the family that might naturally instigate that conversation, then that's great. So, for example, if you are doing wills and you can sit down and say, look, we did this the other day, or we want to do our wills, would you be our executors? It kind of opens the door. A lot of the time it's a case of get people around for a cup of tea. Really just de-stress the situation as much as you can, make it really informal, really relaxed. And here's the thing, if you are trying to open the conversation, it's going to be difficult. Your heart's going to be slightly in your mouth, and it's going to be quite scary. Just jump in there. And I think
this is the thing for any difficult conversation. We, for starters, also always anticipate the worst. I mean, I personally recall I went to finish with a particular guy one time, and I was like psyching myself up for it, and when I got there, he actually finished with me, so that was happy days. I didn't have to do it, but what I'm trying to say is sometimes, don't expect the worst, because actually we were both on the same page, so it worked out fine.
Yeah. And remember the relief you're going to feel once that conversation has been had, all that information is out there. That's massive. I mean, I watch clients going through a meeting, and you can see their shoulders dropping away from their ears as they just calm down, go, oh, we've done it. It's done. The conversation's been had. It's out there. And it can be so important, not just for your money, but also for, health situations. If something happened to you, what decisions would you want your family to make for you? And if they don't know your mind and your heart and how you feel about those things, they're not going to make decisions that might make you happy and might be in your best interests. And not because they don't love you or care about you. You're giving your families and your friends opportunities to care about you, in my opinion. And even crazy things like funeral requirements. So from my point of view with my work, part of the thing you can put in a will is what you want from your funeral. Now, if you actually haven't discussed that with anyone, no one will see your will until after your funeral. So if they've done something that wouldn't actually be what you wanted, and you've not taken the time to warn people and let them know, that can be quite distressing when people eventually read that will and they realize, oh, we got it wrong because we didn't know.
In fact, it's interesting you should say that. My nan passed away nearly 6 years ago, and in France the turnaround, shall we call it, is pretty quick compared to the UK. So she died in the night of a Tuesday to Wednesday morning, and she was buried on the Friday. So you don't hang around. And they obviously picked clothes and whatever. And some 6 months later, whilst going through the drawers and the cupboards and the whatever, found this dress, which was, if I remember rightly, her engagement dress. And there was a note from her asking to be dressed with that for a funeral. But no one knew.
No one knew.
So there was an element of guilt, but at the same time, nobody knew.
Actually, I had a very similar experience. I was aware of some people, not through professionally, friends of mine, who a mum had passed away and she had cancer. And she, through the treatment, had lost all of her hair. Now, some of the children really felt that, you know, she would want to be buried with her wig on so that she would look as much what they would call normal self as possible. And other children were saying, no, she hated that when she was alive. It made her head itch. She didn't like wearing it. And there was huge distress in the family because you know, they'd never talked about it. They'd never discussed anything like
It's
that.
something so trivial in effect, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah. But you know, when we don't want to have these conversations, and it can be a really big reason why people don't want to talk. It's if they're just not ready to face that reality just yet. But once you've bitten the bullet and done it, you've got that boogeyman out the way.
Because this is it, it's acceptance, isn't it? Once you say it, you've accepted it to a degree. But I think one of the things I particularly want to put across here, because it's something that happened to one of my clients, is that yes, a will is important, but the conversation around it even more so. And I just share the story, which is that a dad died. A dad had remarried and obviously died. And when they found out about the will, she found that her and her brother were excluded from it and had absolutely nothing left to them. And that's left an awful lot of questioning. First of all, you know, was it him that decided that, or was it his new wife, you know, when he was dying? If it was him deciding that, why was that? Did he not actually love them? Was, you know, the main issue here. And in terms of like all the unsaid, the grief, the lack of closure, she carried that no longer with her for about 5 or 6 years, you know, and there was an awful lot of anger as much as sadness, because why did you not at least have the balls to tell us, basically?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. And I feel awful for them. That's a terrible situation. And it might be there were very, very innocent reasons behind it, but she will never know now.
And she will look for the worst.
Yeah. And he may well have not had it because he didn't want to get into an argument caught between his new wife and his children. But maybe if he had been brave enough to have that conversation, that would never have happened, and the children would have been perfectly understanding and it would be fine.
Yeah.
But yeah, not giving a reason. I mean, I have to say, whoever wrote that will for them, I would have some serious questions about that as well. But that aside, that conversation would have been much easier, I think, than he might have anticipated, and would have solved so much heartache.
And I think to a degree, I get it. Like, if, you know, in families, people have not been talking for 25 years, I get that they would exclude someone from the will. But that's not necessarily the case. You know, it must have been a bit of a shock, to say the least.
It must have been a huge shock, especially in that situation where there is a normal expectation that children will receive some benefit. And a lot of what I do is about making sure that, you know, if a member of a couple passes away, are we going to protect that inheritance for children so that new spouses are not going to be able to get in there? You know, these are the kind of planning things we do consider. Because it's important to everyone. But then again, I always encourage people who are clients of mine to have the conversation before they make any decisions. You know, keep people up to speed with their choices, because you don't know actually how your family are going to feel. They might react in a way that you're not expecting and will surprise and delight you with their understanding and compassion.
And I think this is the thing, especially nowadays with people, you know, in reconstituted families, so to speak, where there might, you know, the mother or the woman might have a couple of kids, the guy might have a couple of kids, and then all of a sudden they have one themselves. And that leads to so many issues if there isn't a will, because who's going to get what? You know, let's say a child is 5 years old and the guy has actually raised that child, which isn't his, you know, for 10 years. Would he not class that as his own child? Do you know what I mean? It becomes like a mind thing, doesn't it?
Yeah, blended families can be really, really difficult. And actually what's interesting is if you have these conversations, remembering who has said what and what was agreed can also be really important. I was part of quite a difficult conversation once where a gentleman had passed away. He had a new partner who he'd been with for many years, but they'd never got married. And they had been brave enough to have the conversation with his children. All right, so if I pass away, what's going to happen? But he didn't make a will after that.
Mm-hmm.
And then the new partner having said, oh, guys, I've built my own wealth. You would want your father's. I'd be completely happy with that. When the time came, she switched around and made a bit more of a play for the estate. But they'd had the conversation and they were able to say, well, hang on, we spoke about this. You respected the wishes at that point. And it strengthened their argument. And because they had had the conversation.
Does it not become their words against hers, though?
It does, very much so. But there's roots around that. And they were empowered to pursue those roots because they knew that that's what their father wanted, because they'd had the conversation. They weren't left in any doubt of, well, he wanted her to have had everything. They were very empowered and strengthened by their knowledge.
Okay. And in the same, kind of breath, so to speak, pets. Because people, I mean, I know that in divorces, pets are a major issue because they all want like custody of a dog or a cat or whatever. But, people, and I suppose as you get older, if you're on your own, especially if you've got a pet, you don't necessarily want that pet to just be abandoned, or, you might want to put things into place for him or her to be looked after.
Yeah, absolutely. And you can, within your will, you can state where you would want your pet to go. But again, you have to have talked to whoever you would want to have your pet, just the same as guardians for children. Have that conversation first and say, I know it's a bit morbid, but if anything happened to me, would you be willing to look after my gorgeous dog or my lovely kids? And again, the answers can be surprising, and it can be very bonding where you get the answer from someone. They say, yeah, we'd love to. But certainly if you've not had a conversation and all of a sudden the executor of a will turns up on your door with a lovely cat and says, here you go, and you're not prepared for it, that's a bit of a shock. Yeah. But yes, sometimes also making sure you've had the conversation means that you've thought about it.
What about, like, for instance, I know that I have voiced what I want for my funeral to my parents, and an aunt of mine was there as I was saying it. My mum is not particularly happy with my choice, and said that she wasn't happy with my choice. And both my dad and my aunt then said, well, yeah, but, that's what she wants. But my question is, it's not in writing anywhere. Could that still be, so to speak, enforced? Or I went for an operation once and I realised, oh my God, what if I died doing general anaesthetic? This was about 7 years ago. So I quickly handwrote, and wrote something saying, I want my cat to go there, I want this to that, my house there, and blah, blah, blah. Is that also enforceable, so to speak, or?
It's better than nothing.
Yeah.
But you have to be careful. You are left very open to challenges with vague things like that. So if you wanted that to be considered a will, it probably wouldn't be, because it might not be properly witnessed and attested. So someone could quite easily come along and say, well, she wasn't in her right frame of mind at that point. Could you argue that she didn't have mental capacity at the point where she made her will? So it wouldn't be considered you'd be in danger that it wouldn't be considered a will because it hadn't gone through those proper processes. So yeah, better than nothing, but not great, I would say.
Which leads us very nicely towards powers of attorney.
Yeah. So those are huge.
Because I think people don't always completely grasp what it is and what the benefits are.
Yeah, amazingly so. So I love powers of attorney. I think they're hugely important. There's two different kinds. Well, there's three different kinds you can get, two of which I focus on. And that's your health and welfare power of attorney and your property and financial affairs power of attorney. And you grant power to people you know and you trust to look after your affairs in your best interests and the way you would want them to. So for me, on a health bent, that's hugely important. You can, the people who love you will know things like, what time do you like to get up in the morning? What kind of clothes do you like to wear? What food do you like eating? And that's all can be part of your healthcare.
Which I guess most people wouldn't even think of including, so to speak.
No. No, exactly. And also things like if you were in a car accident and in an awful situation where someone has to make that choice, life-sustaining treatment, if you haven't had that conversation with someone, which you might find very scary and very morbid, and really, like, I don't want to talk about this, because people get, it's almost like they worry if they have the conversation, they bring it closer, they make it more likely to happen, which of course isn't true. But if you haven't had that conversation and then something happens to you and you've not granted powers of attorney to somebody, who's making that decision? You know, people who don't know you, people who don't care about you. And even if you have appointed an attorney, if you haven't sat down and had the conversation, this is what's important to me, this is what I'd like, they're not going to know what to do for you. And everyone's feelings on that are completely different and swayed by different influences in their lives.
And I think, you know, my perception of powers of attorney, I guess, and I'm sure a number of people, is that, you know, it is very much when you get to a certain age. It's for when you're older, before, you know, dementia sets in or whatever. Yeah. But what happens if, you know, a young person has a car crash and ends up as a vegetable? Because it's too late then, isn't it?
Yes. So powers of attorney you can write whilst you have mental capacity. If you're deemed to have lost mental capacity, and you're completely right, that is really ageless. You never know what's going to happen in your life, so it could occur at any time.
But at the same time, I can't see a 30-year-old deciding to just go, oh, I know, I'm going to do powers of attorney tomorrow just in case, because they wouldn't want to give that power away.
Yeah, you're completely right. They do. And also, we all think we're invincible, don't we? We all think we want to live forever, so it's never going to become relevant to us. For me, what I tend to say is, do you know what? I really want you to have powers of attorney, but I also really hope they're a massive waste of money. I really hope you never need it. But if you do need it, let's get them, you know, ready, just in case.
So at what point would you advise people to start looking into that?
It's not really age related. I think as soon as you think it's something you can do and you can afford to do, and there are people in your life who you would grant that power to, because obviously when we're young, also the people who are our peers, maybe they're not the most responsible of people. Let's be honest. You know, get them done. Just get them done. And that's going to be a different time for everybody. But as soon as you think, actually, yes, there is this person in my life, I would be happy for them to be my attorney should anything happen to me, get them done.
And what happens if a power of attorney person dies? How do you go about it then if you're not in a mental capacity to kind of like designate someone else?
So what I tend to advise is that you have at least, well, an ideal number for powers of attorney is 2 people. So you can either have that as 2 people acting jointly together at all times, or you can have that as one person is your attorney and then you've got another there as a reserve, as a backup. So you have to think quite far in advance and think around an issue. But yeah, I would always say have a couple of people, whether you have them jointly or one as a reserve or able to act jointly and severally. If you've got more than one person, you've got that backup in place already.
And I think when we think of a will, we think of the financials, don't we? But I think it's important to point out the emotional, because I think sometimes people, you know, when someone dies, would like to have a little something, as a, for one of the better words, souvenir, but as something to, like, you know, fondly think of them, I suppose.
Yeah.
But then sometimes people don't think of it that way, and it's something that's kind of left behind.
Yes, and quite often I find that parents will leave, say, grandfather's medals.
Yeah.
A really common one. I've got one gentleman who is absolutely adamant a particular grandson is going to have his Lego collection, because his Lego collection is really important to him, and this one particular grandson and he have always played together with that Lego set. So, you know, it's just Lego, but not to him. To him, it's much more than Lego, and he wants to make sure that that little boy has it if anything happens to him. So yeah, it's about it is a little bit about leaving love and leaving memories.
And do you find that also difficult conversations? Because I'm sure that, you know, someone would want that piece of jewellery, but equally someone else would want it too, or whatever.
Yeah, absolutely. Or someone might look at that and think, God, you know, grandma's earrings, I really love them, but I don't want to see money grabbing, and someone else might want them, and they might be too shy to come forward and say, I would really like that if anything happened to you. And again, if they have the difficult conversation, they overcome that shyness and say, Mum, you know, grandma's earrings, could I have them? They might be surprised and find Mum goes, oh God, I would love you to have them. That's great. I'll make sure it happens. And how nice is that to have had that moment?
Yeah, and I think sometimes it's also insignificant objects, isn't it? As you said, like the Lego, for instance.
Yes. Or I have another gentleman who has a wonderful collection of family photographs and family documents that have no real meaning or real purpose, but they really lay out the family's very interesting history. And he set out in his will who is to have which album and which documents, so that they can all trace the family history that's relevant to them. And again, but it's a lovely thing.
Yeah, and I think it's about thought, isn't it? You don't want to think you're going to die. No one does. It's not pleasant. No. People don't particularly like to talk about money, as we said. You know, sometimes it's the kids that don't want to say that maybe they're in trouble or that they're doing better than anticipated. Sometimes it's the parents that don't want to have the conversation because it frightens them that, you know, maybe they want to keep more than they want to give, and feeling quite selfish and all the emotions that go with that. So yeah, it's not an easy thing, is it?
No, not at all. But again, the relief if you do. I will never forget, there was an older couple who got their wills done with me, and they were actually very simple, but the father's health was deteriorating, and Mum, although she was never brave enough to say it, you could tell she was anxious that if something happens to him, what happens to me? And the whole way through the process, they were knocking about, laughing and joking and acting like they didn't have a care in the world. And then on the day where we sign the wills, it's a process called attestation. As soon as the signatures were done, she suddenly looked at me and her face fell, her eyes welled up, and she just whispered, thank you. And then that was it. The mask went straight back up again, laughing, joking as if it hadn't happened. And just that little window showed that that step, having that conversation, getting that thing in place, just meant the world to her, and she was just too scared to let anyone know before that. So yeah, it can be a very powerful thing.
So I guess, you know, we're getting to the end of our time together, and my last question normally is something along the lines of, what would you say to someone who, fill in the blank? And I think, you know, from what we said, it's quite obvious, even if you're scared of having that conversation, just have it anyway. But is there something you would say to finish it off, to maybe reassure people even more so?
Yeah, do you know what I would say? I cannot think of a time when I've been present or heard about someone taking that leap and having a conversation where it hasn't been a really reassuring and positive experience for them, and gone so much better than they thought it would. Take the jump, because you will be surprised at how nice it turns out.
Right, Caroline, thank you so much for your time. That is all we've got time for.
Okay. Well, it went quick.
It does. It always does. And so thank you. And for everybody else, if you enjoyed the show, then please subscribe, leave us a review, but more importantly, come back for the next episode. Thank you.